didn't really.
Ready? Okay, we'll get started here in about 30 seconds.
See you, Dave. Coming in, helping
Thank
us
you.
out.
Thank you.
I may sit back here and pray for you.
Okay.
You do the job.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and call our legislative post-audit meeting to order Wednesday, July 20th. First thing, just want to remind everybody that we are live streaming. Also, don't forget to turn in your travel vouchers. We'll go ahead and go to our legislative post-audit. Audit Awards 1. Chris, you want to give us an update on that? Turn to tab A.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. As we're waiting for the rest of the committee to trickle in, I thought we'd start with, I just wanted to share that our office has recently won 2 National Legislative Program Evaluation Society Awards. The National Legislative Program Evaluation Society is a staff association within the National Conference of State Legislators. Our audit of the Department of Labor Unemployment Claims won an Excellence in Research Methods Awards. This award is kind of a big deal. This award is presented to legislative offices that used exemplary research methods in an audit report released during calendar year 2021. The award is especially selective and may be given to a maximum of 3 offices nationwide in any year. And this is the second Research Methods Award that our office has won in the last 4 years. This Department of Labor audit won because of its exceptional breadth, scope, and depth of fieldwork. The NLPES award judges thought the report successfully applied a methodology that maintained efficiency while leading to a more comprehensive result. And it also won because of the technical difficulty and sophistication in our methodology. The award judges thought it successfully used advanced statistical techniques to efficiently and effectively study the issues. As you recall, that audit, we employed a neural network or a form of machine learning to evaluate more than 1 million unemployment claims. Secondly, our audit of the Department of Agriculture price verification inspection process won a Certificate of Impact Award, and those awards are presented to offices that issued evaluations or audit reports that resulted in documented public policy changes, program improvements, dollar savings, or other public impacts. Our office has won this award for many, many years each year. Anyway, just wanted to update you all. Those are kind of big deals for our office. I thought you should be aware.
Okay, do we have questions or comments? Just want to say congratulations on your awards. We'll go ahead and move on to executive session items. We have Office of the Attorney General Security Audit and the Kansas Department of Labor Security Audit. Representative Toplicker, you got a motion?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. I move to recess this open meeting for a closed meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319A to discuss matters relating to the security measures that protect the Office of Attorney General and the Kansas Department of Labor for discussion of the security of the information systems with the appropriate individuals from each entity under the justification listed in KSA 75-4319B12C because discussion of such matters in an open meeting would jeopardize such security measures, and to resume the open meeting in room 546 South at approximately
It's 50 minutes, so
9:55, and to record this motion if adopted as part of the committee's permanent records.
do I have a second to the motion? Representative Barker makes second. Questions, comments? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Against nay, passes. Chris, why don't you delegate the appropriate people to be in here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The attendee list of people that can stay in the room are the committee itself: Eric Montgomery, Nick Bilsma, Jeff Maxon, Mark Abraham, Peter Brady, Kelly Johnson, Doug Ema, myself, Katrin, and Alex, and the appropriate people will shuffle in and out for the Attorney General and Department of Labor.
I'm guessing you want me to turn the mics off? Okay, we're back in the regular session. Next thing up, committee operations, appointment of Eco Devo Subcommittee. Kristen, go ahead. Turn to tab B.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. As Senator Olson just announced, I'll be covering what's in tab B. So Chris put together a memo that kind of explains what this process is. But per state law, a few years ago, you all gave our office, LPA, the authority to evaluate economic development incentives on a 3-year cycle. And so that law is pretty broad in terms of what it defines as an economic development incentive. And so there's currently something like 50 incentives on that list that we would have to review every 3 years. So we don't think we can do that, feasibly cover 50 in a 3-year cycle. So we would ask for your all's permission to create a economic development subcommittee who would help take that list of economic development incentives and kind of whittle it down to a number that is something we could actually accomplish with the staffing resources that we have.
And
So
the prior committee did that. Is that right?
that's correct. So this is a similar, what we're recommending as an approach like we took last time. So it would have been around January 2020 that we did this last time. It would have been the first 3-year cycle that we were starting. And so it was a 3-person subcommittee that you all established, and they met twice to kind of whittle down that list. And then what we did as LPA staff is put together an official proposal based on that subcommittee's work and brought that proposal to the full committee for consideration and approval at a later date. So we would be suggesting a similar approach this time around. So we are in the tail end of that first 3-year cycle, getting ready to start the next 3-year cycle here probably around January of 23. So today, really just be looking for a motion to create a subcommittee and then delegate authority to the chair to convene meetings as needed to actually accomplish whittling down that list.
And make the appointments.
And choose the committee members.
Representative Barker?
A question for the revisers. Would we be in compliance with 461137? Is it broad enough that we can do that interpretation? Or was the statute specifically said you had to do 50?
Give me a minute to read through the statute, but it does say the Legislative Post Audit Committee shall direct the post auditor and the Division of Post Audit to conduct a systematic and comprehensive review, analysis, and evaluation under the provisions of the Legislative Post Audit Act as selected by the Legislative Post Audit Committee. So that, to me, seems to give you the leeway to do it, but I'll read through just to make sure there's nothing else that would limit your authority there.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Okay. Further questions? Do we have a motion? Representative Barker?
If the reviser does not come back and say we're wrong, I would make a motion that we create a committee.
Do we have a second? Representative Tarwater seconds. Questions or comments? All in favor, please signify by saying, oh, go ahead.
So basically, the subcommittee would take a look at the 50, it would filter down to see what the top recommendations for examination would be, and then they would bring it back to us
Correct.
for approval of your auditing of those economic development.
Yeah, so kind of what timeline I had in mind was if you all approved creating a subcommittee today, we would try and get that subcommittee to meet sometime this fall and then bring the full proposal to this committee for the December meeting.
There's always changes that can be made, but I think what it'll do is give the 3-member will review and try to figure out which ones are the best, and then we'll bring it, they'll bring it back here, and we can always, if the committee doesn't like it, we can make substitutions.
About how many would it filter down to? Out of the 50?
For the first 3-year cycle, we landed on 10. So some of it will depend on which incentives are selected. So some of them are pretty small and probably wouldn't be that time consuming to review. Others are very big and would lessen the number.
Representative Tarwater?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment, the recent audits that were done on some of the incentive packages were very thorough, and I think it would be better to pick the top priorities and do the audit correctly rather than rush through 50 of them in a 3-year period and not have the adequate resources. And so I would support this. Thanks.
Any further questions or comments? Not seeing any. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Against, nay? It passes. Okay. We'll move on to performance audit. Cryptocurrency. Matt, you want to go ahead and start?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Matt Etzel. I'll be presenting the findings from our limited scope audit looking at the state's cryptocurrency tax policies. Matt Fahrenbrook was the supervisor on this audit. I was the audit manager. This audit had one question, and that was to determine how Kansas's cryptocurrency tax policies compare to federal policies or best practices. The short answer to that is that Kansas's tax policies generally aligned with federal policies on cryptocurrency. But we found that some of those policies have been difficult to enforce in recent years. And I'll get into that more in just a moment, but I wanted to give the committee just a high-level explanation and a little bit of background on cryptocurrency, which begins on page 3 of the report. So, of course, cryptocurrency is a digital representation of value. What I mean by that is, of course, there's no physical currency. It's all kept virtually on a complex form of encryption called blockchain. Basically, cryptocurrency utilizes what's called a distributed ledger to store cryptocurrency data. So instead of like a single bank ledger, cryptocurrency distributes its transactional data over several different blocks that are all chained together. Each block has its own encryption key or password that you would need in order to access it. So the idea here is that even if somebody hacks into one of those blocks, they only get access to a very small piece of crypto data, right? So they need to hack into countless other blocks in order to get enough transactional information to really do anything meaningful with it. So by design, it's pretty hard to track and access cryptocurrency from the outside. How people access their own cryptocurrency is a little less complicated. Basically, anytime someone acquires cryptocurrency, whether they purchased it or whether they got it in exchange for goods or services, they receive what's called a private key. And basically, that key is connected to the cryptocurrency that they acquired, which again is kept on that secure blockchain. People keep these keys in digital wallets until they choose to do something with it. If at some point they want to purchase something, they'd use that private key from their wallet to access their cryptocurrency from the blockchain to initiate a new transaction. So there's a few different things that people typically use cryptocurrency for. You can use it to purchase goods and services. Recently, some retailers have started to accept cryptocurrency as a form of payment. You can also use cryptocurrency as a form of speculative trading or investment similar to like stocks or bonds, traditional stocks or bonds. In either case, cryptocurrency transactions really should be taxed. And that takes us to our main findings, which begin on page 4 of the report. So basically, at the federal level, the IRS taxes cryptocurrency as property, and that's because cryptocurrency isn't recognized as legal tender currently, so it is taxed as property. So for example, let's say someone accepts cryptocurrency in exchange for a $40,000 vehicle. That person must determine the fair market value in US dollars of the cryptocurrency that they received in exchange for that vehicle, and report that as part of their federally adjusted gross income, or their AGI. As another example, I also mentioned some people use cryptocurrency as a form of investment. In those cases, basically the IRS says any gains from trading cryptocurrency are subject to capital gains tax and would also need to be reported on a taxpayer's AGI or their corporate federal taxable income, or FTI. So really, at the federal level, taxation of cryptocurrency really occurs as part of someone's annual income tax, either through their AGI or their FTI. Now, we looked at how Kansas taxes cryptocurrency and found that it is very similar to how the federal government taxes it, and that's because Kansas's income tax code basically mirrors federal tax code. So many states, including Kansas, choose to adopt federal tax policy as the basis for their tax code. There's a couple of different reasons for that, but it can help simplify the state's tax policies. It also give the state a few more resources when it comes to tax audits and tax enforcement. So basically, because Kansas uses federal AGI and FTI as a starting point for the state's income taxes, if people are reporting their gains and their income from cryptocurrency like they should be, Kansas should be receiving tax revenue from those cryptocurrency transactions. So if it's in that federal AGI or FTI, Kansas would be seeing revenue from it as well. The problem that we ran into is that it's been really difficult for the IRS to verify whether someone should have reported cryptocurrency as part of their taxes. And that's probably led to a lot of underreported income when it comes to cryptocurrency. Basically what's happened is that traditionally there's been a lack of third-party reporting when it's come to cryptocurrency, especially in large cryptocurrency trades. So for example, some people use private exchanges to invest and trade their cryptocurrency. It's similar to like a stockbroker in these cases. As you can imagine, some of these trades are pretty high dollar, but there hasn't been a mechanism that requires those exchanges to notify the IRS of those trades and who's involved in those trades. So basically, it's been difficult for the IRS to track down cases where someone should have reported capital gains from crypto but didn't. So up until this point, it's been a little bit of an honor system when it came to reporting those forms of income. And because of that, people probably aren't reporting all their gains on their AGI or FTI. And again, because Kansas uses those as a starting point for its state income tax, Kansas is probably missing out on some of that revenue as well. The federal government is aware of this and did pass a bill in 2021 that should help strengthen some of this third-party reporting. Basically, starting in 2023, cryptocurrency exchanges will be required to report customer information and transactions to the IRS. That should help them identify cases of underreported or unreported income. That being said, that really only applies to those crypto exchanges, right? So individual transactions that are going on are still going to be hard to track and will still likely result in some underreporting going forward. Finally, we did see that Kansas had a specific policy related to sales tax and cryptocurrency. The Kansas Department of Revenue issued a formal notice in 2020. That notice said if retailers or other stores choose to accept cryptocurrency as a form of payment, they are still responsible for determining and remitting the sales tax for those items sold in US dollars to the state. So again, because the state doesn't recognize cryptocurrency as legal tender or as a formal currency, those stores would be responsible for basically determining the sales tax in US dollars and remitting that to the state. That concludes my presentation. Happy to stand for any questions the committee may have.
Do we have an estimate? I seen it was what, $2 trillion? Or what, how much is being used in, airdrop, the different ways of doing it? Do we have a national number at least?
Yeah, there was an estimate, I believe, from, I think you're referencing on page 4 there. The IRS estimated there's roughly 8,600 cryptocurrencies. So just, of course, Bitcoin is one of the more popular ones, but there's almost 9,000 different types of cryptocurrencies that have an estimated combined worth of about $2 trillion.
Well, and I seen there at the back, there's several states have enacted legislation, where it shows blue, like Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, Missouri. It looks like Kansas and all the way north hasn't, but there's several states have enacted different legislation. I was just curious. We don't know what that is probably, or do we?
So what we found there was that 22 states had introduced legislation related to how to tax cryptocurrency. Of those, two had actually enacted legislation. So I think the point we're trying to make there is it's very much still an emerging issue. There aren't a lot of established best practices out there currently, and it appears states are still grappling with how best to tackle this issue as it continues to shift and evolve pretty rapidly.
Okay. Further questions? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it very much. With the regard to how it tracks some of the transactions within the crypto exchange, I know, there's all these different small types of coins that you can invest in and completely lose your shorts on. I guess this is an extremely complex, I've dabbled in it. I know enough about it. You have to have Ether to transfer from your wallet out into the exchange. And then when you make an exchange, you have to take that Ether and pay the Ether to go back into your wallet. So there's all these different transactions that are not typical that you see on a, like if you're trading stock and things of that nature. Did you look into the complexities of trying to track those? Because you can lose a lot of money very, very quickly just from the fees alone and transferring crypto from one exchange to another. Any suggestions or anything that you glean for your on that sort of topic?
Not specifically. Again, we were just looking at how it's taxed, but I think one thing that that just stood out to us was, I think in some ways cryptocurrency was designed to not be a transparent process, right? So the complexity is part of it and it's built into it, which makes it difficult to see from the outside in.
I think this is probably something in the future we're going to see a lot more. I mean, the younger kids, this is how they're transferring money around. There's a generation gap that, we're used to paper money and credit cards and a different way of doing it. But this is kind of the future. I mean, I see it. I see all the, there's all these different platforms and, they're getting paid that way when they cut grass, or whatever. And so I could see that there's a big way of, people not paying taxes on income. Some of it just might be small dollar, but I'm guessing some people figure out how to make it big dollar. So I think, we need to keep looking at this. This is something, as we improve our tax code, that, maybe look at some of the other states and what they've done. Because Kansas is probably losing a little bit now, but will be a lot more in the future. Any questions? Representative Probe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 states have enacted legislation. Do you have any information about how they approach this in their legislation?
We do. I don't have it in front, but I can certainly get you a summary of what those 2 states have done.
I think we've got some officials from the department here. Do we have anybody? Department of Revenue? No? Okay. Oh, yeah, come on up. Maybe you can tell us more about this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Michael Hale with the Department of Revenue. So I don't really have anything to add to what he told you all.
Okay.
It's new and emerging. Pardon me. The IRS is still wrestling with it, and they've enacted some legislation. It's going to take a while for this to kind of work through the processes. The states have been very cautious and not jumping into waters until you know how deep it is. And so that's the approach Kansas has taken.
Okay. Senator Corson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sort of following up on what Senator Thompson said, I found myself in agreement with much of what he said, and not specific on the tax issue, but maybe this committee could take a look at. I'm a big believer that folks should be able to make the individual investment economic decisions that they want to, but I also do worry about folks finding themselves really vulnerable to something that they may not fully understand. And I think it'd be interesting maybe for us to look at what are we doing as a state to provide just sort of neutral, balanced, straightforward information for our citizens so they can make good, educated decisions about whether these are good, sound financial decisions for them to make. I want to leave that up to individuals, but I do worry about folks, particularly the seniors and other folks, maybe getting involved in something that may not be in their best financial interest. So that would be something, if other members of the committee have an interest in looking at, I would be curious what we're doing as a state just to promote awareness and dispensing of good, solid, accurate, non-biased information for folks to be able to make their own decisions about. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. And Senator Thompson, I hope I didn't cut you off when I kind of made my comments. So if you had more you want to elaborate, go ahead.
Just one thing, and I think that, you know, the simplistic approach would be, you know, when you cash out, for example, if you have crypto on GDAX, which is one of the exchanges, and you want to exchange it back to US dollars, you dump it back into your bank account. But that doesn't account for all the transactions that you made during the course of your trading one coin or another. And so it's very complex, to your point, and I think that there's a lot more research that needs to be done before we ever approach this.
And I know U.S. Treasury is looking into more and more, and that's one of the nice things. Most states that have an income tax of some form or another conform to the federal code. And so, as Matt pointed out, it either goes into FTI or AGI. And certainly the IRS and Treasury have vast resources that a state like Kansas simply doesn't. And so it's nice that we conform with them, so whatever comes through into federal taxable, Kansas will pick up. Doesn't mean there's not going to be some shenanigans and so on, but you can certainly limit it by conforming.
Well, you know, my concern, this was my audit always, is to have a balanced level playing field where everybody shares equally. And so them transactions are always my biggest concern.
And this is a completely unregulated area, and so it is kind of caveat emptor. I mean, buyer beware.
Yeah. Okay. Further questions or comments? Thank you, and thank you, Matt, on that audit. We'll move on to the IT audit, IT security service. Andy? Is that the right one? Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So this is actually a staff request from our cybersecurity audit team, led by Katrin. And the impetus in a nutshell is them continuing to see concerning cybersecurity controls in the agencies that they are auditing, as you all know better than most. So to get at why that might be happening, we looked at a couple of things, and you can see the questions that we answered at the top of page 2. And they are whether the cybersecurity services offered through Kiso, which is the Kansas Information Security Office, which I will continue referring to as Kiso, whether those are sufficiently comprehensive to meet statutory requirements and state agencies' needs. And question 2 is whether Kiso provides cost-effective security services to state agencies. So I will get into question 2 in a minute, but let's flip to the top of page 4, where you'll see the answer to question 1 in the bold at the top. So we found that Kiso offers cybersecurity services that appear to satisfy state law, but that few agencies use their most advanced services, and that some agencies don't seem to know what their agencies need or receive. And I'll unpack that in a moment, but let's go through the rest of page 4 just to sort of set the stage. So you'll see in the bold there that the 2018 Kansas Cybersecurity Act created Kiso, and the intent was to reduce state agencies' cybersecurity risk. So Kiso is part of the Office of Information Technology Services, or OITS, and OITS provides statewide IT services like the CanWin telecommunications network or the ks.gov email addresses that state agency employees use. And Kiso's role is to coordinate statewide cybersecurity efforts for state agencies. And you can see this kind of outlined in the language that appears in Figure 1. So a lot of this is like help, facilitate, coordinate, that type of language, rather than necessarily directly providing services to state agencies. However, if you flip with me to page 6, you'll see that the way that Kiso has decided to carry out several of its responsibilities under the Cybersecurity Act is through offering services to state agencies. And there's 3 basic levels. They have more technical names, but for the purposes of simplicity, I'll call them basic, intermediate, and advanced, and those are outlined on page 6. You'll see that the basic services are actually fall into 2 subcategories. Some are automatic. They're kind of attached to those statewide OITS IT services like CanWin, which I mentioned before. They secure those. Agencies may not even know that they're getting those because they kind of operate in the background. You'll see also there that agencies can opt into 10 additional basic services that they don't have to pay anything more if they're on CanWin. And those are more focused on the agencies themselves. In the middle of that page, you'll see that Kiso also offers 5 intermediate services. These are slightly higher level versions of the basic services, basically, but they require the agencies to give Kiso some level of control. And then finally, you'll see that Kiso offers advanced services, which is essentially providing an information security officer to state agencies to take over some of those cybersecurity governance functions that are important for having robust cybersecurity. Now you'll see at the bottom of page 6 on the top of page 7 that we found that Kiso is meeting all of its responsibilities under the Cybersecurity Act. The ones that we could check anyway, there was one that was beyond the scope of the audit, so we couldn't really conclude on that. But otherwise, the things that we looked at, they seem to be meeting the KCA requirements. Okay, but on the subject of the KCA, one other thing that it did is it retained state agencies' responsibility for their own cybersecurity. So Kiso is responsible for coordinating, facilitating. It offers some direct services, but they are not responsible for agencies' cybersecurity. And what this means, in reality, you can see towards the bottom of page 7, is that a lot of agencies choose not to use Kiso's services. So you'll see in those sub-bullets that 65 of 74 agencies use those basic services that I mentioned before, but the numbers drop off precipitously after that. So only 15 agencies use the intermediate services, and only 10 use the advanced services. So if the intent of the Cybersecurity Act is to create a centralized cybersecurity agency for the state that can help facilitate for all state agencies, that's not happening, primarily because agencies are choosing not to use Kiso's services. Okay, if you flip with me to page 8, you'll see this there, and then on to page 9. We conducted a survey of 57 top-level IT staff from state agencies, so this is like chief information officers and IT directors, to ask them their opinions about Kiso. And we also talked to 7 of them in greater detail. As you can see at the bottom of page 8, and then especially in the figure 2 on the top of page 9, they had pretty positive things to say about Kiso. So you'll see that in the figure, 24% of survey respondents said that Kiso's services exceeded their agency needs, and 46% said that they mostly meet their agency needs. If you flip to page 10, you'll see a little bit more of the survey responses we got. So this is a bunch of positive statements about Kiso that we asked respondents to tell us whether they agreed or not. And you can see that most respondents agreed with things like, Kiso provides quality services, Kiso's services have improved our agency's security, stuff like that. In the bullet in the middle of page 10, you'll see that officials from those 7 agencies that we had conversations with, 5 of them had positive overall impressions of Kiso services or staff as well. However, at the bottom of page 10, onto page 11, you'll see that we saw some indications that state agency officials may not fully appreciate cybersecurity, the services they're getting from Kiso, and you can see this in some of the responses that we got to the survey. So at the bottom of page 10, that first bullet under the bold, you'll see that, for instance, 11 respondents, or 22%, didn't know whether their agencies had cybersecurity needs that Kiso wasn't meeting. In the next bullet, you'll see that 5 didn't know whether they received optional basic services, and 16 didn't know whether they had signed contracts for intermediate services from Kiso. So pretty basic information about what they're getting from Kiso. Okay, Let's skip to page 12. The next body of work that I want to talk about is reviewing some of the cybersecurity audits that Katrin's team has done recently of the 7 agencies that we talked to in greater detail. So as you can see in figure 4, essentially what we did is compare the Kiso users to the Kiso non-users, the agencies that were kind of doing this on their own in these particular areas, which we thought would be affected by using Kiso's services. So we'll take the vulnerability scanning as an example. You can see there that the Kiso service users, their audit results in this area were not consistently better than those of the non-users. So in other words, just using Kiso services does not automatically lead to better cybersecurity results from our audit team. And our take from that, from those types of results in our conversations with agency officials, you can see kind of bulleted at the bottom of page 12 there, which is that the differentiating factor really is agency engagement in cybersecurity. So the agencies that are more engaged in cybersecurity, that have a better understanding of what their responsibilities are, even when they're using Kiso services, they tended to have stronger cybersecurity, fewer control issues than those that didn't. Okay, bottom of page 13, all of page 14, top of page 15. This is where we talk about kind of where this disconnect is coming in. So our take is that Kiso is simply not being proactive enough in its communication with state agencies. So this is educating state agencies about cybersecurity, making them aware of the services that are available and how those services are supposed to work. And you can see that in some of the survey responses that we got in figure 5 and some of the things that we heard from the agency officials we talked to. Now, Kiso, as you'll see at the top of page 15, agreed that they could communicate better than they are about these topics. They said that they're working towards that. They named a few things that they're doing to be more proactive. And ultimately, what they would like to do is hire a communication staff person who's really dedicated to liaising with agency officials to make sure that they are on the same page, but they don't have a way to fund that currently. Okay, that's question 1. Question 2, I'll remind you, was does Kiso provide cost-effective security services to state agencies? And you'll see our bold answer at the top of page 15 is that we couldn't say definitively because we had some data issues. Before I get into that, I'd like to talk a little bit about how Kiso is funded, because that plays into the work that we did. So Kiso is a fee-funded agency, which means they don't have an appropriation. And whenever they provide services to state agencies, they charge those agencies to cover their costs. Now, in order to determine whether Kiso's services are cost effective in terms of how much they're spending and how much the agencies are paying them for those services, we would need to be able to determine how much each individual service costs. As you can see at the bottom of page 15, top of page 16, we weren't able to do that. And the basic reason for that is because Kiso staff, software, and tools go to support multiple services. So in order to determine how much any individual service costs, you'd have to divide those things up and determine how much of them is attributable to each service, which is not really reasonable. However, we could tell, as you can see at the bottom of page 16, top of page 17, based on data that Kiso provided that we weren't able to independently verify, that Kiso's costs were more than their revenues overall in fiscal years 20 and 21. So we could tell generally how much Kiso is spending, how much they're bringing in overall, but we couldn't tell how much each individual service is costing to provide. Okay, let's skip now to 18. So in the middle of page 18, you'll see that we talked to those 7 agency officials that we interviewed that I mentioned before about their take on whether Kiso's services are cost effective. 5 of the 7 couldn't comment. They just didn't have enough information to be able to speak to that. 2 of them had positive things to say in this regard, as you can see in those 2 bullets. Bottom of page 18, top of page 19, you'll see that survey respondents, in a similar way that they had positive opinions about the quality of Kiso's services, they also had mostly positive opinions about what they were paying Kiso. So you can see in figure 7 that the advanced and intermediate services were pretty strongly positive in terms of whether Kiso's services are cost effective and reasonably priced. The numbers drop off a little bit when it comes to the basic services. And you'll see there at the bottom of page 19, onto page 20, some of the stuff that Kiso described to us about how they are trying to limit their costs, and because they're fee-funded, what state agencies have to pay them. At the top of page 21, you'll see our recommendation for Kiso. It's going to sound familiar. We recommended that they more proactively educate state agencies about cybersecurity and Kiso's available services, which they agreed with. So with that, I will send in for questions.
Okay, do we have questions for Andy? Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, sir. Couple questions. How big is the Kiso staff for the people who work with all the various agencies?
That's a good question, and one for Jeff Maxon, who is here.
Yep.
Okay.
He'll be up next. Is there
Okay.
any other questions for Andy? And then Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was hoping that you could get to the committee a listing of the agencies. You had 65, 15, and 10 that use the various services on page 7. Would you be able to provide a listing of the agencies on who's using what to the committee?
So information about which specific services agencies use is permanently confidential, or security concerns. It's similar to the security concerns that we have about the cybersecurity audit results that we share in executive session. Whether I can share that with the committee is probably a question for the revisors or Chris, or maybe Jeff Maxon, is not something that I think I can decide on.
Yeah, I think we'd probably look to the appropriate people, and I don't know if it's something we can share in executive session, but at the same time, you know, we can't take that information out of there and do anything with it. But, Representative Barker.
Chairman, I agree. I think we would need an opinion from the reviser. And I think we probably, and I'm just thinking, we could do that in executive session at some point in time, but we can't risk the possibility of any security breaches. But
I think we should just let the revisers make that decision and the appropriate people. And then if we're going to have it, it'd probably be an executive session at the next meeting or whatever after it's made. Is that all right? And we can put a statement out in writing in the next few days. Representative Thompson, or I'm sorry, Senator Thompson.
It's okay.
Get going.
I understand, it's confusing. Are there, because it seems like the communication's the big issue between the individual agencies, IT people, and Kiso. Are there dedicated people at Kiso who work specifically with certain agencies, or does it just kind of rotate around depending on the needs? Just curious.
I think that's also probably a question for Jeff Maxon. I couldn't speak to that intelligently.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any further questions for Andy? Representative Tarwater.
Sorry.
I almost promoted you.
I know I'm new to this committee, so I'm doing some catch up here, but are our agencies limited to Kiso? I mean, it seems like some of these agencies that don't use Kiso do better. Are they using other services, and how are they cost effective?
So agencies, because they're responsible for their own cybersecurity, can use Kiso. They can also have internal agency staff fulfill some of these functions. They can contract out to private third-party vendors. As far as whether those services are cost-effective, we don't have any insight into what they are paying for those things, so I couldn't speak to that. But yes, they have a lot of options.
So some of these agencies that, like the 10 agencies use the maximum services, the other agencies could be using another service to protect the data.
They could be, yes.
Thank you.
Further questions for Andy? Representative Burrows.
Really not a question, a comment. With all the IT audits that we've done, this has been an issue that has come before us a number of times in reference to a security audit. I know I have been ranking member of the budget subcommittee that does OITS work, and I can't share with you how much more professional and in control they are of the costs that they're charging agencies. Even though the audit says we can't identify those costs, it has become more efficient and more effective under the new secretary. She has done a wonderful job with OITS, and I know my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that I serve with on the committee have stated the same thing. Matter of fact, we sent her acknowledgement for such. But the security aspect, it's been implemented through OITS, and the purpose of that was to provide some sort of IT security. But when you have a stovepipe organization, sometimes your specialty is not what KOIS offers. So that's why you have an outside firm, a third party, or it could have been the one that developed your software for you. So, but I would just state that I really liked this audit. I liked what I found out because it just verifies what we have gone through on our budget subcommittee with OITS. I think we're in better hands today than we have been in a long time.
Further questions for Andy? Not seeing any. We'll go ahead and have Jeff Maxon, Executive Branch. I'm going to just go ahead and give floor to Senator Thompson because I think he's got a couple of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jeff. Basically, yeah, I was, the question surrounds basically how to effectively communicate the Kiso with the specific agencies, and you heard my question, so
Yes,
I'll let you address those.
All right. So, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, my name is Jeff Maxon. I am the State Chief Information Security Officer, and the Kiso is essentially my organization. So to kind of go back to your question, so I have a staff of 17 right now on the books, and that is a challenge to fill because there is a huge skill shortage in the cybersecurity space and with IT professionals in general. And so again, that is probably one of our biggest challenges, especially to address the communication piece and working with agencies. So as Andy mentioned, my agency is a purely chargeback model. So we are broken into a couple different pieces. I have a technical side of the house, which I consider my cybersecurity operations, which they're managing IT devices and cybersecurity devices at the bigger services across like CanWin, which is a state network. So we do provide the security services to the state network, as well as to things like Office 365, the overarching security to the data center of the service effort that we've been working on for the past couple of years. That is a bulk of where my efforts are focused on. Again, those rates are baked into what is charged back to the agency for those services as well. So I have to work within those constraints. On the other side of the house, as you heard earlier, I do have a handful of information security officers that work out in a handful of agencies, and those are purely charged back to the agency. So my role in that is I will create an SLA or a service level agreement with the agency and provide a security professional out there to help them manage a security program within their agency. And so once I get an agreement, I'll go out and find a resource. I'll provide that resource to them, and that kind of allows me to have a little bit of a kind of a central governance structure over those agencies that are willing to participate in those services. And from that perspective, again, they're not necessarily the technical piece. They're helping write policies, helping them work on those areas. So information security is a combination of really multiple efforts. So we've got the technical side, we have the assurance side, which is kind of the policy side, but all that is working in conjunction with agency management and IT staffs. And so when you see findings and stuff, there's multiple people involved, and it's just not, for example, a cybersecurity issue. It could be an IT operations issue that there's a shortcoming, et cetera. So from a perspective, there is a lot to be done across the board with multiple stakeholders. So we consider that, you know, kind of management, operational, and technical controls. From the communication perspective, I've been in this position since July 2020. I've started several efforts to kind of broaden our scope and get out there with the agencies. So I do a monthly lunch and learn with agencies just to talk about general security topics, get them more involved, expose them to what services we can provide, things like that. So we are working on that. But again, being a chargeback agency, I have to be careful how I spend resources that I am not funded, as Andy mentioned, to have an individual purely for the communications aspect. And so that is something we recognize we are continuing to try to do better in, because again, communication is actually probably one of the, you know, getting in early, one of the most important things. So hopefully recognizing that.
You have a follow-up?
Just one. Do you find that there's working with the individual agencies and the people that there's a duplication of effort, or that their level of expertise, you just want to be the most efficient you can. You know, are you guys providing the additional expertise that they lack at the agency level? I mean, just what are you finding generally in that regard?
So around that, so some agencies are better than others. I do know there are a few agencies that may have dedicated folks that are specific on cybersecurity efforts. A lot of other agencies, it's kind of become an additional duty to other IT folks, so it's really kind of a mix. My office is purely focused on individuals that are just performing those functions. And again, even on the technical side, I do offer those services out to agencies for a small fee as well, so they can use our services in that perspective. But some of them choose that they feel, as the audit calls out, they might feel like they have a loss of control. And again, that goes back to some messaging pieces that we need to do better on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions? Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on then. Performance audit request, Kristen. They're in tab C, so if you turn to tab C.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I will be kind of giving a brief overview of the audit request that you have in front of you. It comes from Representative Shu, who is also with us today, and may have some remarks when the time is appropriate.
Sure.
So if you want to turn to tab C, you'll see the proposal there. It would have us review jaywalking citations in select Kansas communities. With the concern being that jaywalking, there's been some research in recent years showing that jaywalking citations may be disproportionately written to certain demographic groups. And so this would have one question, which is how many jaywalking citations do select Kansas communities issue and who do they issue them to? So I would say that our plan here would be to look at we're estimating up to 15 municipalities in Kansas. From a little bit of the background research that I've done on this already, I'm pretty confident that we could get data on the number of jaywalking citations and probably where they're issued. I am not sure about how much demographic data will be available on some of this stuff, so you'll see like a note in the estimated resources section caveating that piece of it, just for your all's consideration as well.
Okay, is there any questions for Christian? Representative Barker?
Do we happen to know how many communities have the jaywalking laws? I mean, out where I'm from, it's look to the left, look to the right, and cross anywhere you want. I just wondered if we had any idea how many.
I don't yet know the answer to that.
We might.
15 of them, is that?
15 was what I'm estimating in the time estimate that's here.
Your estimates were 4 months, I believe.
It
Let me
is.
check.
I have to remind myself. It'd be 4 staff for 5
Auditors,
months
5 months to do this audit?
to try and get the data that's associated with that. So based on a lot of this is time that I think it would take to try and gather that type of information.
Okay, we'll let the representative, maybe he'll have some stuff to add. Representative Rishu?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee. My only other option today was knocking doors in 100-degree weather, so I will gladly take this reprieve to talk with you all. I also want to thank Kristen for all the work. I think many of you are familiar with what happens when you're the point legislator for an advocacy group, and there's a bunch of different meetings that get thrown together. So Kristen was wonderful. So I'm here today on behalf of Michael Kelly at Bike Walk KC, who, as their name might imply, spend their time advocating to make communities safer for active living, so biking and then walking, obviously. So last year, they worked extensively with the Kansas City Council to remove their prohibition on jaywalking. It's actually a term, this is fitting, that was coined in Kansas City in 1905. So, you know, right as motor vehicles became popularized. So the city was prompted to move after the mayor's legal counsel, this is in your packet, reported that out of the 123 jaywalking tickets issued in the city, 65% were handed to black pedestrians, while they only make up 30% of the overall population. So the reason that this is brought before you today is because when they were looking at the Kansas side of the metro area, and my district is part of that, there was some concern that arose that Kansas state law might preempt individual communities from doing the same thing. I'll just quickly read KSA 8-1537 subsection A, which states, where a sidewalk is provided and its use is practicable, it shall be unlawful for any pedestrian to walk along and upon an adjacent roadway. So that's what ultimately what we're going to be looking at. So, for example, if my district is right on the state line, I have a grocery store 2 blocks in, so we get a lot of pedestrians when it's not 110 degrees outside, walking to the grocery store. So it could be a valid conversation for the council to have to decide, hey, we want our jaywalking ordinances to be more in line, but the concern is whether or not the state law interacts with that at all. So that's ultimately what we're here for, is just to kind of look at how the state law and local ordinances interact and collect the data. So this was actually not my first option to look at. I actually reached out to the KBI to see if they have a statewide database on jaywalking citations, because again, it sounds like it's in the state statute that it shall be unlawful. And they thought they had a database, and then when I reached out, they said, actually, no, we didn't, sorry. So that's why I thought it would be an appropriate venue to go through legislative post-audit to start the data collection, and if anything else, start to put in maybe standards for data collection as well, if it is indeed a statewide mandate. So ultimately, just data collection, that's all that we're really looking for here. Happy to answer any questions that you guys might have.
Questions? Representative Barker.
As you know, we normally pick our audits in April, and I would imagine this one will probably go into the bin, and it will be next April. Did you ever consider doing a 100-hour audit? Just, because those are approved by the chairman and then by the committee, but I always use those to see if there's any smoke. If there's smoke, then we maybe want to look at if there's a fire or not. Bad analogy today for me, but a 100-hour audit may accomplish what you want to find out if we have a conflict and things, and that can be done quickly. And you may have the results before the next legislative session, where this one would be set into the bin, and we would not decide it until April, unless the committee should decide to cut out one of our audits that we picked out in April.
Sure.
To replace. So that was just more of a question. Would you be willing to do that?
Go ahead and respond.
So that's something that we talked about it with the advocacy organization, and they remained fairly adamant. They wanted a kind of a full audit to get as much of the data as possible. It seemed like the 100 hours was not quite enough time to get as much as they wanted to. We can have the conversation on whether or not we push this back towards April or not, or I can continue to have the conversations with them. But I just wanted to make sure that I got in front of you early, and so then maybe next April, you guys are a little bit more comfortable with the idea as well.
If we did the audit, it is only going to be a sample size of 15 cities. You might want to just talk to the league and see if they can't help you with a questionnaire. Might be another option, or work with research to pick up some numbers too.
My understanding from the organization was they wanted somewhat of a more official, answer or data collection. I don't know if Kristen, if you had any more detail from your conversations with them. Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's fine. I didn't have any more conversations with the Bike Walk KC folks about that. I did talk to the League of Municipalities, so I know they don't have information already gathered on that sort of thing, but that could be a possibility in terms of it being a limited scope. The conversation really centered around how many we could collect. So I think in a 100-hour audit, we could maybe look at like one city or municipality if that was of interest. But for now, the direction was more like we'd like to get a sample, maybe some big, some middle, and some small-sized communities, hence the full scope request.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, doing a 100-hour, we could, probably get that approved pretty quick. This is a pretty big audit for auditors, 5 months, and we're kind of got our schedule going. So I guess, is there any other questions? Representative Tarwater.
the people that you're advocating for, have they thought about the health ramifications to making jaywalking legal? There are 7,000 people killed every year by being hit by vehicles, and if you remove a law to protect their safety, what happens when somebody dies? Whose fault is that going to be?
So that is part of the conversation we had. So I did ask them to talk with their advocates and then who they're working with at the KC Police Department to try to get more data, because again, they just repealed their prohibition last year. So, but I haven't received that yet. But I think that is a valid conversation to be had. I think this is a larger conversation. I think jaywalking to some extent is maybe misunderstood. I don't know that a law or not a law prevents much jaywalking. I don't know about you guys, but I do it, you know, and I'm well aware of the fines and ordinances. I think the larger conversation to be had is does the additional penalties and fines solve the problem? So I think there absolutely is a valid conversation to be had. I just don't have that data quite yet.
Are there any further questions or comments? Got something to add? Okay, well, I'll ask then, we've got all the questions taken. I'll ask all the members, is there a motion for either to approve for today, or we'll move this to our spring meeting and consider it?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
I'd like to see that, but I've got to say that 35 years on the bench, I never saw a jaywalking ticket. Maybe it's just because where I live. But, you know, I would think that since we've just completed our list of the audits for next year, that we put this in the bin. And then in April, when we consider all of our audits, we will give it proper consideration at that time. Because as we know, we're limited to the number of audits that we can pick from. And if we put it in comparison to some of the other audits, it may look good, it may look bad, but you know, at least at that time in April, we'll get to evaluate all the audits that have been proposed and then prioritize them at that time. So that would be my motion, that we put it in our bin for post-audit to bring it back to us in April when they bring all the audits to us.
Do we have a second? Representative Thompson seconds it. Questions or comments? Okay, everybody understand what we're voting on? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Against nay? Okay, your audit will be put into the bin, and when we consider next year which audits to do, it'll be in consideration for the whole committee. Okay, we'll move on. Okay, consent calendar items. Kristen, go ahead, and we can move to tab D.
Okay, I'll give everyone a minute to turn there. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. The consent calendar has 2 items on it today. So the first of those is approval of the meeting minutes from the April 22nd meeting. That's the one where we selected audit topics. You can find those in attachment A that's in that tab. The second thing on the consent calendar is approval of, acceptance of the performance audits that were presented today. So that includes the limited scope audit on the state's cryptocurrency tax policies that Matt presented, and the audit of the Kansas Information Security Office, IT security services that Andy presented. So unless there's objection from the committee, those items would be considered approved. Just a reminder that members may abstain from voting on the minutes if they weren't present at the meeting.
Is there any motion to object? Not seeing any. Does anybody want to abstain or need to abstain? Okay. Representative Tarwater wasn't here, so he probably needs to abstain. Okay, it's so passed then. Chris, additional business. Chris, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is tab E in your notebooks, just looking ahead at what's coming down the road for you guys. The beginning of that document in tab E just summarizes the audits that were presented today and the committee business that happened. Next coming up, sometime in August, I will be working with the chair to schedule these. We will have the budget subcommittee to preliminarily approve the agency budget. And then work that is underway or wrapping up and looking like it'll be ready in September or later this fall. That is the CARES Act, the COVID funding audit, the statutorily required virtual schools audit, a limited scope audit looking at broadband. The next IT security audit is for the Great Bend School District. An economic development evaluation of the major programs. Again, this is the end of that first 3-year cycle. We have some data mining work we'll be presenting to you on the TANF program. Triennial IT audit summary. And the election security audit is underway. That is currently looking like January. We will have some statutory proposals that will need your approval. Again, these are audits that were required by law. And that is the next school audit on at-risk and a cost study of K through 12 education. And the LPA budget that is approved by the subcommittee will come before the full committee sometime this fall. And then just there at the bottom, again, just a reminder of the audits that you all approved. They are on our list. We have not yet started them. That is looking at the groundwater management, child support enforcement, community college athletics, working from home considerations, the follow-up audits, and the next IT security audit in the queue is the KU Med Center. Again, I'll be working with the chair to set dates for these meetings, but I just wanted to give you a notice of what's coming.
Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chris. I thought we had in the audit queue COVID spending, COVID money.
Yes, ma'am. That is the CARES Act COVID spending one. That should be ready in September.
Wonderful, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Okay, thank you, Chris. With that, we're adjourned 15 minutes early. Thank you.